The smell hit you before the sight did. Those who entered the room of Ulysses S. Grant in his final weeks often found themselves choking back a gag. His throat was rotting from the inside out, tumors bursting, flesh eaten away by disease, every swallow a moment of unbearable agony. His voice, once strong enough to command 500,000 soldiers, was reduced to a rasp you had to lean close to hear. This was the man who had crushed Robert E. Lee, preserved the Union, and twice served as President of the United States. And yet, in the last battle of his life, Grant sat skeletal, wrapped in shawls, scribbling furiously through the stench of his own decay. Desperate to finish his memoirs before death silenced him forever. Tonight, we are going to walk through that journey. The rise, the glory, the ruin, and the horrible death of Ulysses S. Grant. But before the pain, before the stench of cancer, before the long road to glory and ruin, there was a beginning. Ulysses S. Grant was born on April 27, 1822, in the quiet village of Point Pleasant, Ohio. He was not born into wealth, nor into politics, nor into any expectation of greatness. His father was a tanner, his mother a deeply religious woman of few words. Even as a child, Ulysses was different, quiet, reserved, deliberate. While other boys shouted and scrambled, he approached life with calm steadiness. The neighbors would remember him not as a child of brilliance or loud ambition, but as a boy with an uncommon gift with horses, a gift that would shape his future more than books ever could. At 17, Grant entered West Point. He ranked in the middle of his class, neither remarkable in mathematics nor dazzling in strategy. But what set him apart was his mastery of horses. Time and again, his classmates stood in awe as he took the reins of animals too wild for others. A fellow cadet recalled, Grant could ride with such ease that no horse ever seemed beyond his control. It was not genius in the classroom that marked him, but composure in the saddle, steadiness in the face of risk, a quality that, one day, would make him a general unlike any other. Had war not come, Ulysses Grant might have left the army altogether. He found garrison life dull, the routines of drills and paperwork stifling. But in Mexico, in 1846, war gave him purpose. At Monterrey, he made a daring ride through sniper fire, clinging sideways to his horse with one arm while carrying dispatches with the other. At Chapultepec, he helped haul a cannon into a church steeple and fired down on enemy troops below. Reckless, perhaps, but ingenious and effective. His commanders took notice of his calm under fire, his daring when others hesitated. And yet, in private, Grant confessed unease. He called the war unjust, a war of conquest rather than defense. Already, the quiet soldier was a man of paradox, courage without vanity, achievement without satisfaction. After Mexico, peace brought him no joy. He longed for Julia Dent, the woman he had married in 1848, but was stationed far away, in desolate posts of Oregon and California. Loneliness became his companion, and alcohol became his refuge. By 1854, his superiors had seen enough. Grant resigned his commission, disgraced, broke, branded a drunkard. He tried farming. He tried business. He even sold firewood on the streets of St. Louis to feed his family. The man who had once shown brilliance on the battlefield now seemed destined for obscurity. To most, he was finished. And then came rebellion. The year was 1861. The Union trembled on the edge of collapse. Few would have guessed that the failed officer, forgotten in civilian life, would rise again. But war offered Grant a second chance. Commissioned first to train Illinois volunteers, he quickly showed what set him apart. At Fort Donelson in February 1862, when Confederate officers asked for terms, Grant gave a reply that would define him. No terms except unconditional and immediate surrender. Newspapers hailed him as Unconditional Surrender Grant. In a nation desperate for heroes, he had returned. But fame came at a price. At Shiloh, in April 1862, his army suffered staggering losses. More than 23,000 men killed or wounded. Newspapers called him reckless. Rumors spread that he had been drunk during the battle. The criticism was savage, and whispers grew that he should be removed. But Abraham Lincoln saw what others missed. "I can't spare this man," Lincoln said. "He fights." With that one sentence, Lincoln saved Grant's career. And from that moment forward, Grant's rise would be unstoppable. In 1863, Grant launched one of the most brilliant campaigns in American history. At Vicksburg, the Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi, he marched his army through swamps and bayous, cut supply lines, and surrounded the city. For 6 weeks, he bombarded and starved it into submission. When the Confederates surrendered, the Mississippi was in Union hands, and the Confederacy was cut in two. The victory made Grant a national hero once again, and Lincoln now had the general he needed to end the war. By 1864, Grant commanded all Union armies. His style was relentless, pressing Lee again and again despite horrific losses. Some called him a butcher, but his strategy was clear. He would never let go. In April 1865, at Appomattox Courthouse, Robert E. Lee surrendered. Grant, victorious, refused to gloat. He offered generous terms, allowing Confederate soldiers to keep their horses and return home. He even forbade Union soldiers from cheering at Lee's humiliation. In that moment, Grant preserved not only the Union, but also the possibility of reconciliation. He had risen from disgrace to become the man who saved a nation. In 1868, the war hero became president. He entered office at 46, the youngest man yet to hold the White House. His name was revered in every loyal household, his reputation for honesty and courage unshaken. As president, he fought for Reconstruction, defended the rights of freedmen, crushed the Ku Klux Klan, and signed the Civil Rights Act of 1875. He even created Yellowstone, America's first national park. Yet his presidency was not free of shadows. Scandal followed scandal. Loyal to friends who proved corrupt, he found himself accused not of stealing, but of being blind to those who did. By the time he left office in 1877, his reputation was battered. Still, to many, he remained the soldier who had saved the Union. To others, he was proof that even great men can stumble in politics. Even as pain consumed him, Grant never faced it alone. His wife Julia, the woman who had stood with him through war and triumph, sat faithfully at his side. Their children gathered often, speaking in hushed tones, careful not to tire him. The general who once commanded armies now relied on the gentle strength of his family. In that quiet room, there were no battles, no politics, no glory. Only love, loyalty, and the unspoken understanding that his days were drawing to a close. This was the Grant few outside ever saw: a father, a husband, a man surrounded by those who mattered most. When the pain allowed, Grant asked to be moved outside to the porch. There, in the soft warmth of summer, he found a measure of peace. The mountains rose in the distance, silent witnesses to his struggle. He breathed the cool air and let the sunlight fall across his worn features. For a man who had lived most of his life in the noise of battle and the clamor of politics, these quiet moments on the porch were a gift. Each breath was difficult, but each view of the hills reminded him of the vast, enduring beauty of the country he had fought to preserve. Every hour was a battle. Cancer had stolen his strength, but it could not conquer his will. He forced himself to write, even when every swallow burned like fire, even when his hand shook so violently the words blurred on the page. Doctors urged him to rest, but he pressed on. Grant knew his time was short, and he would not leave his family unprotected. The war had taught him discipline, and now, in this final campaign, that same discipline drove his hand across the paper. Each line he wrote was an act of courage against the shadow of death. In his quiet hours, memories returned like phantoms. He saw the long lines of weary men, the thunder of cannon fire, the smoke that once blackened the skies of Shiloh and Vicksburg. He saw Appomattox again, where Lee had surrendered and the war was finally ended. Those images lingered behind his tired eyes, not as glory, but as burdens. Grant never reveled in war. He had always seen it as a necessity, a grim duty. And now, as death approached, the weight of those memories seemed heavier than ever. He bore them with silence, as he always had. He did not waste his final strength. Along with his memoirs, Grant wrote letters, quiet farewells to friends, words of love and reassurance to family. His writing was slow, his hand unsteady, but his mind remained clear. Each letter was a fragment of his soul, placed carefully on paper. He did not complain, nor did he seek pity. He gave only what he had always given: steadfastness, humility, and a sense of duty. To those who received his words, The letters became treasures, echoes of a man who faced death with dignity. Beyond the quiet lodge of Mount McGregor, the nation waited. Every report of Grant's failing health spread across newspapers, drawing crowds who gathered in silence to read. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol of victory, unity, and sacrifice. Farmers in distant fields, veterans in small towns, and city dwellers alike prayed for him, spoke of him, and felt his struggle as if it were their own. America watched with bated breath as the general who had once saved the Union now waged his final battle against time itself. The end drew near, but still he pushed himself. He was determined to finish his memoirs, determined to leave his family secure. The pages piled high, filled with his clear and honest prose. He wrote not for glory but for truth, to give the world an account of the war as he had seen it. His son sat beside him, helping when his strength failed, lifting papers when his hands could no longer hold them steady. Each word was a triumph. Each finished chapter was a victory greater than any won on the battlefield. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Grant asked once more to sit on the porch. Wrapped in blankets, he gazed over the land. The air was still, the light golden and gentle. Those around him sensed the time was near, yet his face held serenity. He had endured the suffering, fought his last battle, and now he seemed at peace. For a long moment, he simply watched the horizon, as if seeing not just the mountains before him, but all that had been, his childhood, his wars, his presidency, his family. And then, quietly, he closed his eyes. On the morning of July 23, 1885, Ulysses S. Grant breathed his last. The battle was over. Around him, his family wept softly, clinging to the memory of the man who had given everything for them and for his country. No cannon boomed, no trumpet called. Only the quiet sigh of grief filled the room. A soldier, a president, a husband, a father, his journey was complete. The man who had carried the weight of a nation in its darkest hour now rested in silence. His war was finished. The news spread swiftly, and across the country, bells tolled in mourning. In New York, the funeral procession drew millions, veterans, citizens, leaders, all united in grief. Black drapes covered the carriages, flags hung low, and men who had once fought under his command stood with trembling salutes. The streets overflowed with people who came not out of duty, but out of love, respect, and sorrow. America wept for the man who had preserved its union. Though his body was laid to rest, his legacy lived on, etched forever in the heart of the nation. On a quiet hill at Riverside Park, overlooking the Hudson River, Ulysses S. Grant was laid to rest. His coffin, draped in the American flag he had fought to defend, was lowered with the dignity owed to a soldier and a president. The river below moved steadily onward, as if carrying his memory through time. Thousands stood in silence, their heads bowed. Here, far from the noise of battlefields, the man who once commanded armies found his final peace. The nation had given him its heart in life, and now, in death, it gave him eternal rest. Beside the grave stood Julia, his faithful companion of decades. She had walked through war with him, shared the burdens of power, and endured the long shadows of his illness. Now, dressed in black, she wept quietly, clutching a small bouquet. Yet beneath her sorrow was strength, the same strength that had carried her through every trial. For Julia, his death was not the end. She believed, with steady faith, that she would one day see him again. Until then, she would guard his memory, keeping alive the story of the man she loved. Grant's final labor was not in vain. His memoirs, completed only days before his passing, became an instant success. Readers were struck not by self-praise, but by the honesty, clarity, and humility of his words. The book secured his family's financial future, fulfilling the promise he had made to provide for them even in death. More than that, it offered the nation an intimate glimpse into its most painful struggle, told by the man who had guided it to victory. His last work became his greatest gift, a voice speaking beyond the grave. Among those who came to honor him were the veterans who had once followed his command. Their hair had turned gray, their bodies weakened by time, but their loyalty remained unbroken. Standing at his tomb, they saluted through trembling hands, their eyes brimming with tears. For them, Grant was not just a general or a president. He was the man who had led them through fire and brought them home. To salute him one last time was both farewell and gratitude. Their bond with him was eternal, forged in the furnace of war. Grant's death was not only America's sorrow. Across the world, leaders and common people alike mourned his passing. Newspapers carried his portrait, recalling his victories and his leadership. Letters of condolence arrived from Europe, Asia, and beyond. Even in distant lands, his name carried weight, for he was not merely the general who ended a war. He was a symbol of perseverance, of unity, and of peace. The world had taken notice of his life, and in death, it bowed in respect. In the years that followed, the nation raised a monument in his honor. Grant's tomb, towering and solemn, rose in New York City, overlooking the Hudson River. It became a place of pilgrimage, where citizens, veterans, and visitors from across the world came to pay respects. The stone structure stood not only as a grave but as a testament, a reminder of sacrifice, courage, and the price of unity. To stand before it was to stand before history itself, carved forever into the heart of America. Many remembered Grant as a general, but his years as president were more complex. He carried into office the honesty of a soldier, but also the burdens of political corruption around him. Critics were harsh, and mistakes were made, yet Grant remained steady, never seeking personal gain. His presidency was a struggle not of war, but of governance, where loyalty and trust were often betrayed. Still, history would soften its judgment, seeing in him not a politician hungry for power, but a soldier-turned-leader who sought to hold the Union together in peace as he once had in war. Behind the title of general and president lived a quiet man. He loved horses, preferred simple meals, and found joy in the company of his children. He was shy in public, often uncomfortable with speeches and ceremonies. Yet those who knew him best saw his kindness, his loyalty, and his unwavering sense of duty. To his family, he was not the giant history remembered, but a husband and father, gentle, sometimes awkward, yet always dependable. It was in these quiet, ordinary moments that the true heart of Ulysses S. Grant was revealed. Time has passed, but Grant's place in history remains secure. He is remembered not only as the general who brought the Civil War to an end, but as a leader who stood firm in moments of crisis. His life was not free of flaws, nor were his years without hardship. But in the balance of history, his courage, humility, and perseverance shine brightly. He lived as a soldier, he died as a man of honor, and he left behind a legacy that continues to inspire those who believe in the strength of unity and the power of endurance. And so the story of Ulysses S. Grant comes to rest. From the fields of Ohio to the battlefields of the Civil War, from the White House to the quiet lodge on Mount McGregor, his journey was long, painful, and extraordinary. He faced war, hardship, and death with the same calm resolve that marked his entire life. Tonight, as we close his story, we do so with reverence and with peace. His war is over. His work is done. And now, good night, General. Good night. Grant was never a man who sought attention. Unlike other generals, he wore no bright uniform, no show of medals or plumes. He dressed simply, often mistaken for an ordinary soldier. His humility was his strength. He believed that greatness came not from appearance, but from actions. Even when he commanded the largest armies in American history, he remained plain and unassuming. This humility carried into his final days, when he asked for nothing more than peace and the company of his family. In life and in death, he remained true to himself, a quiet man who carried a great burden without asking for glory. Grant's life was not a story of constant victory. He knew failure well, business setbacks, financial troubles, and personal struggles. Many times, the world counted him out. Yet each time, he rose again. Perseverance became the defining mark of his character. From the humiliation of poverty to the heights of commanding armies, he learned that true strength is not in never falling, but in always rising again. His story is a reminder for us all. No matter how heavy the burden, no matter how steep the climb, persistence can carry us through the darkest valleys toward the light. Though not known as a man of loud faith, Grant carried a quiet belief within him. In moments of trial, he turned inward, drawing strength from prayer and reflection. His faith was steady, private, and unshaken by hardship. In his last months, as death pressed closer, he did not rage or despair. Instead, he found comfort in the thought of peace beyond the suffering. His quiet faith gave him strength, just as his courage had carried him through war. And in his silence, there was a lesson that true belief does not need to shout, it only needs to endure. Grant's victory was not one of vengeance. At Appomattox, when Lee surrendered, he offered generous terms, refusing to humiliate a beaten foe. In doing so, he became more than a general. He became a symbol of unity. His actions showed the nation that healing could follow destruction, that respect could follow war. Even in his presidency, though troubled, he fought for the rights of the freed and the protection of peace. In the end, his life's greatest lesson was not simply how to win a war, but how to build peace from its ashes. His final battle was not fought with rifles or cannon, but with pain that never let go. The cancer tore at him daily, stealing his voice, his strength, his comfort. Yet he endured. He bore his suffering with remarkable calm, never complaining, never surrendering to despair. He wrote through the agony, each word of victory. For those who watched, it was both heartbreaking and inspiring to see a man who had faced bullets and fire now fight quietly against the cruelty of illness. His endurance became his final legacy, that even in suffering, dignity can prevail. The words he left behind became his greatest gift. His memoirs were not just history, they were honesty. Without exaggeration, without bitterness, he told the story of the war in plain, clear language. Readers were struck by the modesty of his tone, the fairness of his judgment, and the wisdom of his reflection. Even today, the book remains one of the finest ever written by a soldier. It carries his voice across time, letting us hear the calm reason and steady courage of the man himself. In those pages, Grant lives still. Beside the Hudson River, his tomb stands in silence. The river flows steadily, as it did in his time and as it will long after. It carries the memory of a man whose life was as unyielding as the water's current. Time moves forward, but the river never forgets. So it is with Grant. Though years pass, his story remains, flowing quietly through the nation he saved. The river of time carries us all, but some names, like his, continue to echo along its banks. Generations later, his story is still told. In quiet homes, parents read of the general who rose from humble beginnings to guide a nation. Children listen, their imaginations painting battlefields and quiet porches, their hearts stirred by courage and sacrifice. In this way, his life continues, not just in stone or in books, but in the hearts of those who learn from it. History is never truly gone. It lives in the telling, in the listening, in the passing of wisdom from one generation to the next. Grant's legacy is not one of cruelty or conquest, but of gentleness wrapped in strength. He was a man who fought fiercely when duty demanded, yet who preferred peace whenever it could be found. He was not boastful, not arrogant, not proud. He was steady, loyal, and true. His greatest victories came not from the battlefield, but from the quiet resilience of his spirit. And that legacy, more than monuments or books, is what endures, the example of a man who lived with dignity, who endured with patience, and who left behind a gentle strength for the world to remember. And now, as the night deepens and the stars watch over his resting place, we close the story once more. Ulysses S. Grant, soldier, leader, husband, father, his journey is complete. He faced his battles with courage, his failures with humility, and his death with peace. Tonight, as you drift to sleep, may his story remind you that endurance is strength and humility is greatness. Sleep well, dear listener, and sleep well, General. Good night. The summer of 1885 was gentle and warm on Mount McGregor. Here, high in the mountains of New York, Ulysses S. Grant found the peace he had been searching for. The world below bustled with noise and life, but up here, the days passed slowly, measured only by the rise and fall of the sun. Grant, wrapped in a simple shawl, sat on the porch of the cottage, breathing in the mountain air. His body was frail, his voice often just a whisper, but his mind remained sharp. He looked out at the valley below, at the green trees stretching to the horizon, and found comfort in the stillness. This quiet mountain became his final refuge, the stage on which the last act of his life would be written. Inside the cottage, Grant was never alone. Julia, his beloved wife, rarely left his side, holding his hand gently as though her touch might keep him anchored to the world. His children spoke softly around him, their voices blending with the creak of the wooden floor and the hum of the summer air through open windows. There was sorrow in their eyes, but also pride. They knew this man, husband, father, general, president, was living his final days not in bitterness, but in dignity. The family's presence brought him strength, and though the shadow of death crept closer, he met it with quiet acceptance. Each morning, Grant sat at a small desk near the window, pushing himself to complete his memoirs. The pain in his throat grew unbearable, making eating nearly impossible, but he forced himself to write. Every page carried the weight of history, his childhood, his battles, his presidency, his failures, his victories. More than that, every word was a gift for his family, for he knew the book would provide them with security long after he was gone. His doctors urged him to rest, but Grant pressed on. Time was slipping away, and he could feel it in every labored breath. Yet still, the pen moved across the paper, his final campaign, a battle against death itself. In the quiet evenings, Grant often set aside his pen and gazed out at the horizon. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with golden light. His thoughts wandered back through the years. The boy in Ohio who once struggled to make his way in the world, the soldier who led men into fire and smoke, the president who carried the weight of a broken nation. He thought of friends lost, of battles fought, of triumphs and regrets. Yet, as the light faded, a kind of peace settled over him. He had done all he could. He had lived, he had served, and soon he would rest. On July 20th, 1885, Ulysses S. Grant laid down his pen for the last time. The memoirs were finished, 2 volumes of history, memory, and truth, carved out of his last strength. He leaned back, exhausted, the weight of his labor lifted. There was relief in his eyes, for he had completed his final duty. His words, once silent in his heart, would now live forever. He had defeated death in his own way, leaving behind a legacy of ink and courage. The manuscript, resting quietly on the desk, was his last great victory. The days that followed were gentle but heavy. Grant lay in his bed, too weak to move, his breath shallow, his body frail. Yet there was no fear in his eyes. Julia sat close, never leaving him, her hand resting in his. The mountain air drifted through the window, carrying the songs of birds and the rustle of leaves. For Grant, the world seemed to slow, each sound, each touch, each glance holding deep meaning. He knew the end was near, but he faced it with the same quiet courage that had carried him through war and hardship. In those last moments, his family gathered close, their hearts heavy with grief. His children whispered their goodbyes, their voices trembling. Julia bent low, her tears falling softly as she pressed her lips to his forehead. They spoke to him not as a general or a president, but as a husband, as a father, as the quiet man they had always known. He listened, his eyes filled with love, and though he could not speak, his presence said enough. Surrounded by his family, Ulysses S. Grant prepared to take his final step into the silence beyond. On the morning of July 23, 1885, Ulysses S. Grant drew his last breath. There was no struggle, no violence, only stillness. His face, once marked by pain, seemed calm in death, as though he had found the peace he had sought for so long. The nation's greatest soldier was gone, not with the roar of cannons, but with the whisper of summer air in a quiet mountain cottage. The family wept, and yet, even in their grief, they felt the weight of history. The general who had led a nation through its darkest hour now belonged to eternity. When news of Grant's death spread, the nation mourned as one. In New York City, thousands lined the streets, dressed in black, their heads bowed in silence. Flags hung low, draped in sorrow. The funeral procession stretched for miles, a river of grief flowing through the city. Veterans who had once marched with him walked again, this time in mourning. Leaders, dignitaries, and ordinary citizens all came together, united in respect for the man who had saved the Union. His coffin, carried with solemn dignity, was more than the body of a man. It was the symbol of a nation's gratitude. Years later, on Riverside Drive in New York, a great tomb was built for Ulysses S. Grant. It stands tall even today, a monument not just of stone, but of memory. Inside rests the man who rose from humble beginnings, who led armies to victory, who guided a nation through its trials, and who faced death with dignity. His life was not without flaws, but his courage and resolve left a mark that time cannot erase. And so, as the river flows quietly past, the legacy of Ulysses S. Grant endures, etched in history, remembered in honor, and whispered to the generations that follow. And with that, dear listener, the story of Ulysses S. Grant comes to a gentle close. May his courage remind us of the strength within us all, and may his peace bring you peace tonight. Good night.